Recently, I've been playing Payday 2 in all the wrong ways. No guns, no fun, and then no dignity. But let's keep that streak going by circumventing the game's primary mechanic, crime. Initially, I wanted to turn this into can you beat Payday 2 without committing a criminal offense, but after thinking about it for about 10 seconds, I realized the answer was a hard no. Instead, today we're going to go on a deep dive into the Heist in-game, which can be completed, more or less, without earning us a rather sizable prison sentence at the end of it all. The hope being that Jimmy can finally go on the straight and narrow and get his kids back. A happy ending, at last. First things first, any heist that actually involves the stealing of a physical object is pretty much written off. No matter how you go about taking jewelry from a store, even if you ask politely before smashing open the glass, you've still committed the crime and should look forward to an entire state police force being called over to arrest you. Of course, different justice systems will have different laws in place, but for the sake of keeping things thematic, let's assume US law, specifically the Washington legislature, unless we know the heist is taking place elsewhere. There, it definitively states that first-degree theft is a Class B felony punishable by a maximum of 10 years in jail and a $20,000 fine, and that's even ignoring the armed part of the robbery, which elevates the gang's crime to a Class A felony with up to life imprisonment on the cards, even if a shot was never fired. This can get a little more tenuous depending on who exactly we're stealing from. For instance, Murky Water is clearly a nefarious PMC, but from what we can gather in-game, their antics are, if not supported by the government, at the very least licensed to the extent that the Payday Gang couldn't claim a vigilante defense for their actions, a stance which doesn't even have a legal basis in the US. The crew could try and claim moral rectitude to lessen their sentence, but even if it was decided that the crime of robbing Murky Water's cash from a moving aeroplane could be forgiven, I'm pretty sure we're breaking US parachute operations law by landing within such a populated town, not to mention the criminal negligence of literally flinging pallets of money out of a plane which could easily crush a civilian below. Also, arguing moral rectitude likely wouldn't help the crew when it comes to stealing objects such as the nuclear warheads on Meltdown, as just possession of the special nuclear material within the bombs is considered crime enough, even if the gang only has their hands on them very briefly. There are other instances of us stealing goods that are themselves stolen or otherwise illegal, the BCI helmet in the biker heist springing to mind alongside the fake money printer in Counterfeit. Obviously, the police themselves are attempting to recover the helmet, so not only are we obstructing their operation, we're then obtaining possession of that stolen property, a Class B felony in itself. As they say, two wrongs don't make a right, so even if we could obtain the money printer from Miami bloodlessly, our intent is most certainly to make criminal use of the machines ourselves, which would likely be how the law would judge the case. Shacklethorne Auction is a strange one in that it's certainly not clear how the obsidian plate would be perceived in terms of material value, and we're not stealing from a financial institution as with Brooklyn Bank. However, this is a very purposeful heist involving at least the destruction of private property when we blowtorch the glass panel, and would likely fall into the category of cultural property theft and still lead to a swift prosecution, even if the fate of the world was at stake. Aftershock is a funny one in that we're not actually stealing anything, but simply reclaiming Vlad's safes full of pimped out weapons, yet the cops are called all the same. This has always confused me, outside of responding to the earthquakes as disaster relief. Why are the police even hostile to us on this one? My only guess is that Vlad's men provoked the police due to wanting to protect what must be unlicensed weapons, meaning we're likely aiding and abetting them at the very least, hence the police hostility. At that point, handling the safes at all becomes a crime. Even if we ignore that likelihood, funnily enough, we use C4 to blow through the wall of a building site later into the heist, which almost certainly constitutes the destruction of private property, or more specifically, malicious mischief, which is my favourite ever name for a crime. In all, that knocks 41 separate heists out of the running for our perfect crime-free crime, and I'm happy to add Boiling Point to that list, as although we're dealing with a fairly shady organisation over in Russia, which as Jimmy reminds us makes us the good guys, even if we ignored the C4 explosions and clone scanning, to even make this heist happen, we first have to steal the EMP from Murky Water, something we've already established is a pretty clear-cut crime. Over the years though, the Payday Gang differentiated their criminal ways, leading to a few more simple categorizations we can use to write them off this list. For instance, any heist pertaining to the production or movement of drugs will be difficult to complete without committing a crime or two. Meth and coke, the two substances we tend to have dealings with, are both Schedule II drugs, which are heavily sanctioned, especially for those who manufacture, transport or deliver them. A possible 10-year prison sentence makes the likes of Goat Simulator's wacky goat flinging antics that bit more serious. Amusingly though, Rats, probably the most iconic drug-orientated heist in the game, can be completed without cooking a single ounce. However, an abundance of first-degree gang murder is also a prerequisite, making it actually one of the most crime-filled heists around. Speaking of gang warfare, there's plenty of heists in the game that thrust us into situations where murder is our only recourse. Now, when it comes to self-defense legislation, there's a bit of a grey area here, as I'm fairly certain that everyone we are forced to kill is at least armed. However, we're almost always the instigators of the firefight. Take for example Hoxton Revenge. I don't reckon the law would look particularly lightly on the gang marching up to an FBI safehouse to shoot their informant. Brooklyn 1010 is maybe a little more debatable. Homicide has to take place, but there is somewhat of a case for it being justifiable, first in defense of Sharon, then in self-defense, but bearing in mind the criminal nature of the Continental, the crew are still effectively entering into a sort of gang war and end up committing outright murder directly on members of the NYPD. Not a great look. And this isn't the only example of the police getting the sharp end of the stick. Starting with Hoxton Breakout, a successful escape in the first degree that was aided by the Payday Gang, that's most certainly a crime committed by all involved, even if completed as a pacifist. Same with Green Bridge, another crime directly aimed at the cops that simply can't be avoided. Other heists such as breaking feds or Firestarter see the crew directly break into official law enforcement buildings, which would not only constitute trespass and likely first-degree burglary, there would also be further charges for theft and evidence tampering, bearing in mind what they get up to in there. Alaskan Deal is a bit of an odd one as a setup and police ambush orchestrated outside of Washington, but at the very least, the crew resists arrest, flees the police, and most certainly does everything in their power to obstruct justice. Safehouse raids similarly sees the gang likely resisting arrest and at least obstructing their right to search the safehouse, even if no shots were theoretically fired. Finally, there is another set of heists that eliminate themselves from the crime-free conversation by breaking somewhat miscellaneous laws. Those include extreme voter fraud and election tampering on election day, digital theft and hostage-taking in Undercover, and whatever the hell it is we do in No Mercy. Honestly, I'm not even sure how to categorize the crew's crimes in this heist, but I can't imagine impersonating a medical professional and siphoning samples of an unconscious prisoner's blood is what you'd call exactly by the book. Moorcrasher sees more damage to private property, as does the recently released Midland Ranch heist, although I was surprised to learn that golf carts are probably road legal and don't require license plates in Texas, but I'm also almost certain these things have illegally supercharged engines that the crew should definitely not be driving around in. I'm fairly confident that Heat Street requires the gang to commit mayhem and malicious disfiguring on Matt when in the crashed van, unless you wait out his oxygen supply, at which point there's still a case to be had regarding hostage taking and the obstruction of ambulance and law enforcement personnel. The Whitehouse, on the other hand, is a bit of a strange one. If you think about it, by committing to the secret ending, we don't actually steal anything, and the confrontation with the dentist is one of the few times I'd be happy to say the crew have a pretty good self-defense case on their hands. Without a doubt, the gang's greatest crime in the heist to end all heists is trespassing, as funnily enough it is possible to have a self-guided tour of the White House if you're given permission to do so by a member of Congress. I'm not saying the Payday Gang did that, or that they don't commit a few crimes by slipping a few non-permitted items into the building and breaking and entering restricted areas, but I was surprised to hear that Locke wasn't miles off when he talked about just how accessible the White House actually was. Just maybe not the POC. And with that, we have 68 heists that can't be completed without committing a clearly identifiable crime. Any lawyers out there, please argue the toss with me. Google and common sense can only get me so far. However, I believe there are 3 additional heists, excluding the events, that can be completed within the realm of what could be argued in a court of law as legal. First, we have White Christmas, the initial rescue heist for Vlad's brother Harudin. This one focuses on extracting the drunk pilot before optionally securing bundles of spilled coke from the hold. The key here is that no loot needs to be secured to complete this heist, and at no point do the cops need to be engaged, at least in theory. You see, the SWAT were responding to the crashed plane due to how low it must have been flying, indicating a likely smuggling run. This was correct intuition. Harudin was most certainly committing a crime that the police were right to attempt to arrest him for. Whilst their instant hostility to the Payday Gang may not make a lot of sense, it does if we consider that the crew could be aiding their suspect in his smuggling and escape attempt. According to Justica, a charge of aiding and abetting must have 3 requirements. First, someone else must have committed a crime. Second, the defendant must have assisted that person in the commission of the crime. Third, the defendant must have had knowledge of that person's criminal intent or criminal plans. It all comes down to factor 2 there, as the others are certainly true, and I feel like the gang would have a hard time explaining to a jury that they were just trying to help out an injured pilot when they were in fact lighting a flare and calling down the escape chopper itself. Even so, if we suspend our disbelief, this is one of the few heists where at the very least our actions can be witnessed as entirely legal outside the context of the narrative. Second, let's talk about Hell's Island. To be clear, although Bain was a wanted criminal mastermind, PMCs are not protected by any legislation backing the capture and retention of any wanted individuals. Not to mention the intentional grievous bodily harm he'd suffered whilst in their custody, and likely attempted murder from the No Mercy serum injections, meant Murky Water were very much liable to legal prosecution themselves. Thus his rescue and eventual murder spree might have the slightest leg to stand on in court. However, this is one of those heists that would be difficult to imagine a non-fictional gang approaching as pacifists. In fact, to progress this heist, we have to kill at least 30 Murkies in the ambush, so some PMC murder is guaranteed. The question is, how would that be viewed given the circumstances? And here is where I don't really have a clue. I've done some research into the legal status of private military companies, and from what I can tell, as they are not incorporated within any national military force and are not legally contracted to be operating within America, they are effectively already breaking the law by conducting offensive operations such as the one seen in the capture of Bain. They don't have combatant's privilege, meaning they're effectively civilians, so can be prosecuted for what they've done, and are considered mercenaries without the right to prisoner of war status. As they've acted first in this instance, the gang's assault on our compound may be seen as retaliatory by the court, but I'd be hard pushed to say no crimes at all were committed here. Yes, nothing was stolen, yes, it was to rescue an unlawful prisoner, but some light murder took place in the process. Saying that, I still believe you can feel fairly innocent next time you see Kento dead at Bain's feet. It was in self-defense, after all. And finally, I present to you my best case for an innocent Payday Gang with the Ukrainian prisoner heist. Once again, a heist based around the rescue of an unlawfully held prisoner. Contextually, the Golden Dagger Triad had captured and tortured an individual innocent to any initial crime in Vlad, making them the legal villains of this story. It was in retaliation for the earlier crime of stealing the dragon statue, but that doesn't condone their actions. In the heist, the crew break into private property at the dockyard, however due to its nefarious use as a drug smuggling port, any private contract detailing their ownership of the land would have likely been void in a court of law, although I have to admit, I'm just guessing on this one. From there, the crew are entirely able to go through the heist without killing or stealing any property. Yes, they photocopy and take documents detailing the Triad's activities, but correct me if I'm wrong, an illegal entity has no rights within US law to protect the sanctity of their operating information. I sincerely doubt that this would be considered theft or burglary in the court of law. Other objectives within this heist, at least when completed stealthily, all actually promote a pacifist and by-the-books playstyle. Hell, we even get a licensed professional to drive the skid loader, so just about everything is above board here. So long as you can resist stealing any of the gold you find, and are able to stay in stealth and keep the bloodshed to an absolute minimum, I reckon you can complete this heist completely guilt-free. And with that off your conscience, feel free to become a real-world career criminal by purchasing one of my Apex Gaming PCs. As you know from their heisting titles, these are the only ones on the market built with Payday 2 in mind, so check them out from the link below. As ever, I want to thank you for watching. It's been a bit of a wild month for me, so stay tuned. Streams will be back shortly, and for everyone else, I'll see you all very soon. A huge thank you to my dedicated Patreon backers. If you want to join this crew in going infamous, check out the link below and pledge as little as $2 to see your name in the credits, or get 24-hour early access to future videos and vote on upcoming content. Take care, I'll see you all soon.